Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. Today we are speaking with Mr. Adam Dick about the Apple iPhone encryption case and the general issue of privacy. Mr. Dick is a senior fellow at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. He worked as a legislative aide to Congressman Ron Paul from 2003 to 2013 and was a co-manager of Ed Thompson's 2002 campaign for governor of Wisconsin. He has also worked as a lawyer in New York and Connecticut. You can follow his work on his website, adamdick.com, and on the Ron Paul Institute's website, ronpaulinstitute.org. You can find him on Twitter at Mr. Adam Dick and on Facebook under Adam Dick. For more information, see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/iPhone. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Sure, it's our pleasure. So I know your expertise in this area is more on the legal issues and the privacy issues, so we'll get to that momentarily. But just to get started, can you give us a general sense of what encryption is and what some of the Apple encryption features are that are causing this whole situation to come about?
Well, basically, encryption is a way of hiding your information or your communications from people who don't have permission to access it, so that if they were able to access it, they'd see nothing or gibberish. It's something that people have done for a long time. People might not, they might use a communication going as extreme as using code or ciphers to hide their communications, but also rather routine things like when you mail someone a letter, putting it in an envelope. When you have a telephone call with somebody, closing your window so your neighbors next door can't hear. Basic means of keeping your private communication private. And the other thing the Apple phone has, in addition to encryption, and it's an issue in not just the case for the San Bernardino iPhone, but for other cases as well, regarding other iPhones, is a passcode system where people have to enter a passcode on their phone in order to access the information. And if you enter the passcode wrong too many times, then the information becomes inaccessible as a means to protect it. Many iPhones and other phones are stolen each year, and you don't want the thieves to get that information. And people legitimately don't want, other individuals who may not steal the phone but may have access to it to get the information. And included in that list would be the U.S. government. People have plenty of reason to fear the U.S. government having their private information. This is the country in the world with the largest prison population. Among other things, so there's definitely reasons to fear the U.S. government just having carte blanche access to what's in your phone.
So give us a little overview about how this whole situation has arisen. Why does the government want Apple to change its encryption in any way?
Well, what Comey had said at the beginning was that this case in San Bernardino is about one phone and one phone only. And they put out a press release about that immediately. But just a few days later, he was in front of the House Intelligence Committee, and in answer to questions from committee members, he had to admit that no, this case will be precedent, and it will be either binding or influential precedent. It doesn't necessarily have to be followed, but it has some influential bearing in other court cases. So the case is about two things. It's about the particular facts of the San Bernardino instance, and it's also about creating a precedent to influence other courts to require Apple and ultimately other companies to allow the government to have full access to information that's protected by security codes, encryption, and other means on not just iPhones, but on all other kinds of phones, on computers, backed up information in the cloud, stuff on people's tablets and personal computers. And the talk now is about the Internet of Things. Ultimately, this could be about getting information from your microwave and your refrigerator even. So regarding the San Bernardino case, it's I wrote a while back about how this is a very fortunate case for the U.S. government to be moving forward on now, because the facts are about Saeed Farouk, who the government is saying is one of the people who is responsible for a mass murder of his co-workers at a holiday party, and that it was an act of terrorism. Well, that's not a very sympathetic person as a defendant. He's deceased, but it was his phone, and those kind of facts make it, in public opinion and in the courts, a persuasive case for saying, yeah, sure, Apple, what are you doing standing in the way of this terrorism investigation? We need to know what's on that phone. But there are other cases with very different facts, and one of those is a case involving a fellow named Jun Feng, who entered a plea bargain in New York for crimes related to methamphetamines. Well, people aren't happy about methamphetamines, and a lot of people think people involved in meth business should be sent to jail. But it's not seen as the same sort of issue as a terrorist who shoots people at a holiday party. People are aware that the war on drugs is a failure. They're aware that if you put Jun Feng in prison, the next day somebody else is going to be making meth, and people will still be consuming it. It's not a issue of vital national security interest. But in that case, unlike the California one, the judge was a bit more skeptical, and instead of entering an ex parte order, which is what happened in California, and just to explain that, an ex parte order means that the order is issued after hearing only from one side in the case, in this case, the prosecution side, the government side. That's what happened in California. In New York, the judge invited both Apple and the prosecution to present arguments before the court as to whether the order should be issued to require Apple to basically create a means to obtain information connected to the phone while overcoming the passcode protection. They presented their arguments, and the magistrate judge in New York decided in favor of Apple and decided not to issue the order.
Okay, now I know you've touched on this a little bit already, but can you go into what's being demanded of Apple and what is meant by a backdoor?
Okay. Basically, a backdoor would be a built-in security flaw. Basically, it would say the information here is secured from other people accessing it, unless they come through this particular route that we've created to bypass all that protection. And you create that route and then give access to presumably limited numbers of parties. In this case, maybe just the U.S. government, and maybe just in this case of this one phone. But once you've created the backdoor, a lot of technology people would say there's a danger that other people will uncover the backdoor and be able to use it as well. Whether that be criminals who want to do identity theft, foreign governments, it could be anyone, even other parts of the U.S. government. We can't necessarily, even if you trust the Department of Justice, once the backdoor is created, can you trust the NSA or the CIA not to abuse that backdoor? Also, once a backdoor is created in one case, it can be argued that now that the backdoor is created, it's much less burden for Apple to just use that backdoor to give information about this iPhone in another case. And in the New York case, the magistrate judge did not reach constitutional issues. He was merely looking into statutory interpretation, and was saying that one of the key factors here is is the burden on Apple. Apple's not too strong connection to the meth dealer, and that they weren't in a conspiracy together. He was merely using their product, and issues like that. But if there's a higher need on the government side, such as in the San Bernardino case with terrorism, and if you can get the back door in that case, and in a later case they'll say, well, Apple's burden isn't very high here. They've already created the back door. All they have to do is let us turn the handle and come through.
What are some other arguments coming from the government side and its allies, other than just we need this information for the San Bernardino case?
Well, I think they, it's not just that case. There's other cases there. At least 12 from the Justice Department. You have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of cases from local police departments as well. The district attorney for Manhattan in New York State is saying that his people have 175 iPhones that they want to access. So there's a general law and order argument, and you'll hear proponents of the creation of a mandated creation of the back door saying that iPhones are becoming the tool of choice of criminals because they provide greater protection for people's information. Now Apple would counter that this is part of their strategy as a company to make iPhones a tool of choice of everybody, because of course it's not just criminals that want their information to be private, but everybody does. So that's that would be one of the major counter arguments to that. Also, a counter argument that people with interest in liberty would make is that it's not right to say that if you have nothing to hide, then let the government see everything. Privacy is a fundamental right that people have, and that's an argument Dr. Paul made in a recent editorial on this case, where he talked about the right to privacy and the right to go about our daily lives without the threat of government surveillance of our activities. And a board member of the Ron Paul Institute, Andrew Napolitano, when he talked about this, when the San Bernardino iPhone order was first made public, he said that requiring Apple to take these actions to breach the security it put on the phone would be a form of slavery, because of requiring Apple to do work to create basically new software and new means to overcome its programming against its will. Now, arguments about privacy and arguments about slavery, and the Electronic Freedom Foundation has a amicus brief that it's entered in the San Bernardino case that focuses on the First Amendment. These are all constitutional arguments about fundamental or natural rights, and they're persuasive to us as individuals who value liberty, but they won't necessarily be persuasive to the courts, because even in the court in New York, where the decision came down on Apple's side, it was all statutory analysis, and in the final conclusion, the court makes a plea to the Congress to resolve the matter, suggesting that no matter whatever Congress decides to do on this, mandate that Apple and other companies provide these backdoors, bar the requiring of them to provide backdoors, creating some sort of nuanced position in between that sometimes requires them to create backdoors and sometimes doesn't. Whatever Congress decides to do would be just fine, that they have plenary authority in this area. And that's I'm afraid maybe the best we can hope for from the courts, to hold it off and say, okay, we're not allowing these sorts of requirements to be placed on technology companies for the meantime, but if Congress acts, we'll do whatever they declare in a statute. And that's very disturbing, because there are fundamental rights at issue here for both the technology companies and the people who use their technology.
Yeah, so just to follow up on the federal government trying to force Apple to create new software and to adjust and create new products, is there any historical precedent for the federal government forcing a private company to create new products in this sort of way?
Well, the federal government does do that sort of thing. I mean, if you look at the automobile industry, they don't specify the particular technology, but they require automobiles to meet certain crash tests. They require automobiles to have certain technology like airbags. They require that they have certain emission systems. The U.S. government has changed the composition of gasoline. You know, there used to be leaded gasoline. That hasn't been around in a long time. And a lot of the old cars were meant to run on gasoline with lead, but you can't find that at a gas station now. And now you have blended ethanol inside gasoline. And car companies, you know, they could have kept making cars the exact same way, but you know, they had to adapt the technology in order to have cars not be destroyed by that ethanol in the gasoline. So, you know, those are some examples just in one industry where government certainly, you know, in some instances mandates particular technology, and in other instances takes actions that put a lot of pressure on companies to create the technology so that their products continue to work properly. You know, on another level, the U.S. government pressured state governments to require, you know, mandatory seatbelt laws. So not only were seatbelts required to be in cars, but which is a mandate on the automobile companies, but is ultimately also a mandate on individuals. For example, well, I'll just say that the seatbelt laws are a direct mandate on individuals to wear their seatbelts or face fines. But this is in other areas too. Even, you know, automobiles, of course, you know, deal with the fundamental right to travel. But so also in airports, individuals are required to, in order to ride a commercial airplane in the U.S., to submit themselves to frisking by TSA agents. The opt-out now has been limited so that you may be required as a precondition of boarding a flight to go through one of the new machines rather than the old metal detectors. And that's a fundamental right to travel. You know, even the right to travel anonymously has largely gone away with the requirement that people submit IDs for inspection when they travel, and even when they book plane flights to, you know, provide their name and birthday and other information.
And what has the Obama administration's response been to all this?
Well, it's interesting. You know, the Obama administration was pushing for a legislative solution in the fall, and ultimately gave up on that and publicly declared that they would not be pursuing the requirement of backdoors. But I wrote about this a while ago. It was revealed in a Bloomberg article that as soon as the Obama administration backed down on that, there were top national security officials that were directing people in the U.S. government to go to a Plan B, which was to find other means to accomplish the same result. And you know, the appearance of this San Bernardino case and this case in New York appear to be likely part of that Plan B.
All right. Now, one thing that's been really disconcerting and really horrible about this whole situation has been the media coverage of this, where from what I can tell, the media has been portraying Apple as in the wrong and the federal government in the right, and you know, why won't Apple just comply? Is that your take on the mainstream media's coverage of this situation, and what does that say about views on privacy and on the role of government in the U.S.?
Yeah, I definitely think that is a fair bit of the mainstream media's view on this. I know Dr. Paul was on one of the news channels, and the interviewer host was was pretty unyielding in not wanting to hear, I don't know if she phrased it exactly this way, but the message she was getting across is, why are you defending terrorists? Well, there's the saying that bad cases make bad law, and that's what this is. Because people can be stirred up to be worried about the terrorists, they can potentially create a bad law out of the San Bernardino iPhone case.
What are some liabilities for Apple in terms of their business, and how is this case really going to affect their business? Do you think people are going to start pushing back against Apple and maybe not buying their products?
That's interesting. I mean, there are people who are saying don't buy the Apple products because they're preventing the government from nabbing criminals and investigating terrorism. But there would certainly be other people who would look at the statement of Apple CEO Tim Cook that he put out when the San Bernardino order was released, explaining that Apple wanted to protect the privacy of its customers, and that it would battle against this. And Apple wanted the New York case to go forward, even though the person whose phone at issue there had already pleaded guilty, in order to try to present its case and develop a record of resistance. So it'll depend, and that's one thing. The New York case depended on some of the analysis of various factors, weighing whether this was a legitimate demand on Apple or not. Was Apple's branding or corporate decision to advocate for privacy and be seen as an advocate for privacy of its customers? And there was an argument put forward that wasn't sincere, because Apple has in fact been helpful to the government in a number of cases in the past in breaching its own security on iPhones. But the court there said there wasn't a valid enough argument made that Apple now isn't sincere in taking its pro-privacy stand, and that it would actually be one of the things damaging to Apple, beyond the cost of Apple creating a backdoor or a workaround for its security. The cost of individuals working on that programming and doing the work. There would also be a cost to Apple's brand, Apple's image, reputation, and that would weigh against requiring Apple to do it as well. So Apple's taken the decision that they want to stand up to this, and that's their corporate philosophy. And will that lead to more people wanting Apple's products or less people wanting Apple products? I don't know. But if we see more people wanting Apple products because of this, I would think that that's probably a somewhat good sign for liberty. It would indicate that people are valuing their liberty more than they're giving into fear, whether that fear is being generated by the statements of people like Comey or the statement of news broadcasters on cable channels.
All right, so before we talk about what might come next and we wrap this up, I just want to ask you about this whole notion of privacy versus security, because a lot of times you'll hear politicians and people in the media talking about how the American public should just give up privacy in order to get security. But is there any evidence that that's really the case? Do these privacy infringing measures really prevent terrorist attacks or anything like that? As far as I can tell, they don't. Is that your understanding of that whole situation?
Yeah, I think I think you can have privacy and security. I think the biggest threat to security, and this is something Dr. Paul talked about with that cable news anchor who was giving him some trouble, was one of the biggest threats is U.S. foreign policy. That's what motivates people to pursue blowback, where they attack American citizens in response to drone attacks and invasions and occupations of countries. And if you want to protect people's security, you stop doing that sort of thing. While it's sold as a security enhancing measure for the U.S. to send its military around the world attacking people, it's counterproductive. And while the police will say, well, we need access to these information on these devices to provide you security from criminals. Well, again, it's a lot of the insecurity for people have from criminals is because of U.S. government policy. The war on drugs has created an incredible amount of violence in the United States with drugs instead of being sold by legitimate companies that operate on a profit and loss incentives. They're controlled by gangs that fight for turf, and at the same time the drug war and the war on terrorism and other expansions of federal government criminal power has resulted in, and on the state and local level, has resulted in a situation where 3 people a day are killed by cops in the United States, and where we have the largest prison population in the world, where there are over 100 SWAT team raids a day, when a few decades ago SWAT teams in most places didn't even exist, and in the few they existed, they were used in very particular circumstances. So I don't think the threat of security comes from people keeping their information private. I think it more stems from U.S. government actions, both in creating a police state at home and in creating a military empire abroad.
Do you have any predictions for how this is going to go moving forward?
Well, I think I saw Comey speaking earlier with he spoke at the House Intelligence Committee and the House Judiciary Committee, and in the Judiciary Committee in particular, the representatives were pretty keen on expressing their desire for there to be a legislative solution to this. So that legislative action that was abandoned in October by the Obama administration will likely be coming back. Now, a lot of these representatives were speaking rather negatively towards Comey's view on this, but I do worry that in fact it'll come around and the legislative action that ultimately takes place will give the Justice Department just about everything it's seeking, and what a lot of these local police like Cyrus Vance, the DA of Manhattan, are seeking. I mean, there's some reason for optimism. I mean, for example, there was on March 1st an editorial in the Los Angeles Times by Representatives Zoe Lofgren and Darrell Issa. Lofgren's a Democrat and Issa is a Republican, and they're both on the Judiciary Committee with some seniority, and they were opposing government requiring backdoors and saying that the decision should not be made in the courts, but should be made in the legislature. But at the same time, Zoe Lofgren, she should know that they're trying to create a pro-liberty solution through the U.S. Congress can often be futile. She was stung back when the USA Freedom Act was considered. First of all, the Freedom Act was was sold to counter much of the surveillance by the NSA and other government agencies of Americans and people across the world, but particularly Americans was the focus of the Freedom Act. Without any probable cause or other reason, just sweeping surveillance of everybody. And the problem was that it got watered down. First of all, it was sponsored by Representative James Sensenbrenner, Republican from Wisconsin who had been the sponsor of the Patriot Act. And, not a friend of privacy and freedom there. And so it started off pretty weak, and in order to get unanimous approval, in the Judiciary and Intelligence Committee, it was watered down even further. But that wasn't enough. After that happened, a very strange, outside the normal procedures thing happened, which was that the act was then rewritten after passing the committees, and introduced anew on the House for a vote of all the members, and that was to alleviate even more concerns from the Obama administration and probably people in the surveillance and military-industrial complexes that the Freedom Act wasn't weak enough. And Zoe Lofgren, she saw this and she opposed it on the floor and spoke against the corruption that was evident in the procedure, and spoke about how I think she had 9 amendments that she'd offered, all were denied, and so were all other amendments that members couldn't even vote on those amendments. So, Daniel McAdams, the executive director, he said way back at the beginning of this, when the Freedom Act was starting to bubble up as a potential action to deal with the Snowden revelations, he said, watch out for reform. That's one of the most dangerous things you ever hear from Congress. So that's what I think will ultimately likely happen here is that there will be some reform legislation, called the Technology Privacy Protection Act or something. That sounds great. That actually allows things to continue as they were, and maybe even worse. Michael Hayden, who was the former NSA director, he said that it was cool that 2 years after the exposure of mass surveillance programs, the only purported restraint on the program has been the enactment of the USA Freedom Act. And I think him and people like that will be saying, I fear something quite similar after Congress gets its hands on the matter and decides to pass some reform.
Well, so I guess no surprise, but bad news is likely on the way.
It's likely. We should fight hard against it, and there's always a possibility of success. There has been limited successes in the past. President Obama, he wanted years ago to do bombing of Syria, just like they'd done in Libya, and the American people stood up to it and stopped it. Nonetheless, there's been significant actions in the U.S. Funding various antagonists in Syria, and more recently actually doing the bombing, but it was delayed quite a while. And we can hopefully have some success and maybe even turn some things around. But if we don't succeed, we can use it. We can try our best and hopefully gain some more people through our efforts in opposing violations of privacy. We can gain some education for more people so that they understand the issues, and that ultimately we can turn these things around, even if we lose in the short term.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. So at the top of the show, we mentioned some places to follow your work, but can you talk really quickly again about where our listeners can follow your work, and also where they can go if they want to learn more about the iPhone controversy with Apple, and if they want to learn more about privacy issues in general?
All right. Well, I would say everything I write and do, it goes up at the Ron Paul Institute's website. That's ronpaulinstitute.org. And I can be followed on Twitter and Facebook. And you can find my Twitter and Facebook off of my own website, which is just adamdick.com. And we're doing a good job at the Institute covering this issue. We're not covering all the minutiae. We're covering much of the the bigger picture issues about things like how this this is a plan B to create the backdoors into all products, and it's not just about this one iPhone. Something Comey often talks about is how this is only related to the iPhone 5C operating on iOS 9. Well, the New York case is about an iPhone 5S operating on iOS 7 operating system. So there you in two cases you have two different phones, two different operating systems. So it's don't believe the hype about that. It's about not just one iPhone, but all of them. Some places that are you can look to that are covering this in some detail, and have some good information on it. The Electronic Frontiers Foundation and the American Civil Liberties Union. Those might be a couple places to start, and I think from them you can also get access to some of the legal cases and motions if you want to get that deep into it, to see exactly what all the lawyers are arguing in these matters as well.
All right, well, wakeupcallpodcast.com/iPhone is the place to go, and we will link to all of those resources you mentioned just now, along with everything that's been mentioned throughout the show. So that's wakeupcallpodcast.com/iPhone. And I want to thank you for joining us. This has been a hot topic in the news with some misinformation out there, and it could be the start of something very scary on the privacy issue, or something even scarier, I should say. So thank you for helping us go through that today and understand what's going on with this situation a little bit better.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes, or subscribe on Stitcher, and check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.